We're broadcasting. The channel, I'm sure, will soon be live. Okay, here we go. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
And tonight, we are not talking about an Oscar movie marathon because it was just too hard. Obviously this year is very different in a lot of respects because I just realized I've got the wrong subtitle on the screen.
I just was about to say that, but I don't interrupt you while you're on the flow.
Now I will remove that in a moment, um, I think you hit the nail on the head when we were talking about it. I was feeling like I was really having to push myself to try to watch the movies, even though the ones I watched I liked, but it just didn't feel the same. And so we talked a little bit about it. And then what you mentioned is that, without the part of it's kind of exciting to push yourself to go back to the theater when you maybe haven't been recently, but without that piece of it this year, it feels different.
Yeah, like that's always been one of the things that we it's in every summary that we do. It's about challenging ourselves to see some movies that we maybe wouldn't have seen,
Mm-hmm.
and about getting into the giving you a reason to get back into the movie theaters, which was fun. Before you get into summer and there's going to be some more things that you really want to go see. Like you've kind of gotten that back into your you know routine or whatever, that maybe you didn't go as much in the fall and winter. And so yeah, it's always been a nice part of it. And yeah, some of these are available in the theater. The theater experience is not. I'm not ready to jump back into it. Not out of any kind of fear of safety or anything. It's just not. It's just not where I want what I want out of a movie theater experience right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, it's still just it doesn't feel quite right yet.
yeah,
It's I'm sure we'll get there as the more and more people get vaccinated and we start figuring out what the new normal looks like. But we're not there yet where it feels great. So yeah. So I
speaking of
think
vaccine PSA, both of us are vaccinated with two different kinds. So
yes, I got the J&J and I got it just like 2 weeks before they announced their whole pause thing on it, and so I was right in that sweet spot of like, oh gosh, well, if I was going to have that very rare side effect, it would be happening any day now. But it didn't happen, and so I'm pretty sure I'm fine. And they're just being, extra careful. But yeah, go get vaccinated, everyone. A lot of places are moving to, anyone is eligible now. So, check it out if you haven't recently. But let's talk about what we decided to do today instead of Oscar Marathon, and that is this was a suggestion brought up by a follower on Twitter who said, "What about guilty pleasure movies?" And I thought that was a neat idea, especially just because I think there's something worth discussing just in the very concept of what do we mean by a guilty pleasure movie, and should that even be like a thing? Like if a movie gives you joy to watch, why should you feel guilty about it? Just because it might be something that maybe other people don't appreciate. Does that make, why is that a guilty pleasure? So we can talk more about the concept, but we each chose a movie to kind of reflect a movie that might be thought of as a guilty pleasure. So we're going to talk in detail about Deep Blue Sea and Xanadu. But so before we jump into the
correct.
specific movies, what are your thoughts on the idea of guilty pleasure?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of agreement with you. I mean, we sort of discussed that kind of the subheader behind guilty pleasure is the so bad it's good is sometimes a way it's described, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, how is it bad if it's good?
Yeah.
It's not bad. Yeah. Um, so I agree. Because I kind of thought about it. I was like, because the term guilty implies that it should be something that you either shouldn't be watching at all or shouldn't be deriving pleasure from. And as I kind of thought about that, it really made me feel like none of these movies really match that, like I would feel like in under that kind of deliberate description of it, like it would have to be something fairly, I hate to say it without just being like direct, like, but like porn or snuff films, like that's kind of what that term, like you'd feel guilty if you took pleasure out of that, like that, or you should. Um,
I think there's something to that, but at the same time, I feel like that's not how the phrase is most commonly used, though.
it isn't. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The phrase is not commonly used at that, but when I took some time to reflect on what the words actually meant, that's kind of how it meant to me. Is that like that's what would actually be required to truly feel like where I would feel you should feel guilty if it's just a regular movie. To your point, I'm actually getting back to your point, is that you shouldn't feel guilty if you derive pleasure from a normal mainstream movie, even if it is considered not high art or not high quality. Like there's no guilt in that.
Right.
If you're entertained and there's nothing, and there's not like sort of this, negative impact on society because this movie exists, like then there shouldn't be any guilt. That's where I was trying to get to. I was trying to, that's where sort of, that's why I said it's weird that I said my mind went there, but as I really thought about like what would make me feel guilty about watching a movie and enjoying it, like it would have to be something really dark like that. I don't feel guilty that I like Deep Blue Sea. I don't feel guilty that I like Roadhouse. I don't feel guilty that I like Big Trouble in Little China. I'm just listing mental flosses. I feel no guilt, like to truly.
Those are movies that they call guilty pleasures?
What's that?
You were quoting from a list of what?
From Mental Floss. It's a website.
Okay, but a list of what?
Guilty pleasure movies.
Oh, okay. I was just trying to clarify, just because like some of those, like this just gets to the heart of why would a movie be a guilty pleasure? Because some of those, like Big Trouble in Little China, is just good. It's not. I wouldn't even say it's so bad it's good. Like it's not even in that. It's just good. Now I wonder if maybe part of what it is that like there's an element that I think is common in a lot of movies that fall into this sort of blurry category that just have some degree of camp to them, in the sense that they're kind of heightened stylistically, they're maybe not very grounded or realistic, they maybe don't have high production value, but that's not necessarily the same thing as good or bad. And I wonder if some of this whole concept really just comes from people having imprecise metrics for what they consider to be good or bad in a movie, right? Because there are plenty of movies that are made on the cheap but are still good movies, right? So production value is not necessarily doesn't make a movie good or bad. But like by contrast, you could have a movie be very expensive and still terrible. In terms of artistic expression. But like when I feel like the only thing that's so bad it's good, like that strikes me as a slightly different thing than guilty pleasure, although there's overlap. Because I think that there's an element where, like, it's one thing to say with a guilty pleasure that you just like a movie even though you feel like, I don't know, maybe other people don't like it, but I have fun with it, and and there's that, like, you're ashamed to admit it that you like it because you think everyone else will think it's dumb or something, right? But then so bad it's good is almost like there's a style of watching movies where you are watching it to make fun of how bad it is, right? And like there's the MST3K.
That's a good differentiator. Right. I was gonna say that's a good differentiator.
Yeah, but like there has been, ever since MST3K started doing their whole thing, there are a lot of channels on YouTube and stuff that make their whole living on finding fault in movies, right? Cinema Sins, Everything Wrong with Blank, all of those. And I don't know, I feel like I'm not sure I like that whole mindset. You know, it's one thing like Mystery Science Theater 3000 like makes jokes about movies, but they feel like they come from a place of love and not a place of like I'm smart and the people who made this movie are dumb and that's why I know that they screwed up with this thing. Even though a lot of times they're being incredibly nitpicky or literal when the movie is clearly not intending you to read something that way.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
And then, of course, you have movies that are made like like the movie equivalent of Ugly Christmas Sweater. You know, not just a sweater that you have on Christmas that is, could be described as ugly, but like the whole idea of making a sweater that is ugly on purpose, or trying to make a movie that's schlocky or, so bad it's good on purpose, right? And you get a lot of movies.
That's where I feel Deep Blue Sea, honestly, for me, I believe that falls into that category for me.
Okay, yeah. See, it's interesting. I feel like it certainly toes that line, but I felt like it is not. It manages to walk up to that line and dip its toes in the water, so to speak, but not quite take the plunge because I feel like it's almost about subverting some of those tropes. But then again, I think it's also true that a lot of the movies that I would describe that way seem to take a lot of notes from Deep Blue Sea. In terms of, sudden surprise, shocking deaths, for example, and that sort of thing. But I don't know. Yeah, so maybe we'll talk about it. So I think we can certainly take these concepts back to the general level anytime we want, but maybe we should go ahead and get started talking about Deep Blue Sea. What do you think?
Sure.
All right. So, we talked about both of these movies and agreed on both of them before starting. But this was your selection, so maybe you want to start and talk about why you picked it.
Yeah, I mean, I picked it because and this is why I compared it to your ugly Christmas sweater analogy, and that the idea is that you take the concepts of what makes up a bad, ugly sweater, and you go and make sure you deliberately insert those into your sweater with some self-awareness and some wink to the people who are looking at your sweater. And that's the self-awareness that this movie has about what they're doing is, I mean, somewhat genius to me. I mean, especially the way it comes together. Like you could make a movie where you really, to your point, you pick the tropes, you subvert them, or you highlight certain ones, and it wouldn't come together in the way that this comes together, like a perfect recipe, and so that's what kind of takes it to the next level. But then even when you take all that out, it's just a purely enjoyable movie. Mm-hmm. Even with all of the things that are supposed to make it a bad movie in it, it's still just too much fun to watch. And so when you kind of add all that together, it's just, it's one of my favorite movies to just watch. I just get a pure enjoyment on multiple levels. Like there's just a visceral enjoyment of watching the movie. There's the loving the cleverness and the kind of wink of like, hey, look what we did here. It's we need a scene where we artificially create something where the female doctor has to take it. We had to already create something artificial where she had to put it on over very limited clothing. So here's the scene where she's going to shock the shark and she has to take her wetsuit off to not get shocked. Like it's just, the whole thing is so ridiculous. And that you just know what they're doing the whole time. You just delight in the like. I cannot believe that they created this scene. But then you're like, there are movies who do that with the end goal, not to make fun of the fact that movies do this, but there are movies that actually just do this. And these guys have just You know.
Well, I think that's what makes this feel different to me. I feel like there's a craft there in wanting to have things be justified a bit more and focused a bit more and have it be a little more cohesive rather than just throwing stuff at the wall and who cares if it makes any sense at all.
Yes, I would agree. That is definitely one of the reasons it's so good. You know?
But so, like, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's pretty, like, it's pretty easy to sum up the basic concept, which is it's a underwater based monster movie with sharks that have been genetically modified to be super smart and also big. And the justification in the movie, of course, is that, well, you have to make the sharks smarter because you're trying to get a protein from their brain. So the bigger the brain is, the more protein, obviously. And if you make the shark even bigger, then it's even bigger and even more. It all makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, some way. We haven't done it yet, so maybe super smart giant sharks is the way to do it.
Mm-hmm. So the main characters that we've got Thomas Jane as the base's Shark Wrangler, Saffron Burrows as the lady scientist who's kind of taken the primary responsibility for this whole project, even though you got it's Peter Sarsgaard. Is that I always mix up which Sarsgaards are which.
I believe that's which one is in this.
Yeah, let's see. Gosh. Stellan. No, this one is Stellan Skarsgård.
That's right.
But even though he's there, so actually that will lead me into a point I want to make in a second. But we've also got Samuel L. Jackson as the man, like the guy who's in charge of the money, who's coming to check up on what this place is doing and how they're progressing. And LL Cool J as the highly entertaining cook there on the base. And then we've got a few other characters that are a little bit more secondary. But one of the things, though, that mentioning Stellan Skarsgård makes me think of is just the fact that I think it is massively unfair how much all of the other characters dump on Saffron Burrows' character for this all being her fault, as though this was the obvious end result of her playing God by, God forbid, trying to cure Alzheimer's. But it's just one of those things where, like, suddenly we have this scene where the sharks have attacked and it's a disaster, obviously. But suddenly now we have everybody else in the scene forcing her to admit that, yes, they broke rules about genetic manipulation. And then everyone is just furious with her and how could you and whatever. And I'm thinking 60% of the people in this room have been helping with this project the whole time. One of them is the primary financial backer for the project. And this is not exactly the obvious end result. So why is everybody being so mean to her? I think that was kind of massively unfair in this viewing, is kind of how I felt about it. What do you think?
I mean, they sort of hand-wave explain it away in that she violated certain protocols that would have prevented, where you could have, the idea is that you could have run these experiments a little bit more safely with some guardrails off. Mm-hmm. And it was her decision to do that caused the problem. Now, it's a little unclear that the problem wouldn't have still existed had she not done that. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of their, like, oh, this is why it's her fault, is how I took it,
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that, like, you can certainly get there. But it's also true that, like, Stellan Skarsgård's character, like, the blonde lady who calls her a bitch and seems like she's the most angry because her boyfriend Stellan Skarsgård has gotten killed. I'm wanting to say, like, he's the other co-head scientist. You think he didn't know? Like, why is it all her fault?
Yes, I agree with you there that he, in that literal, yes, he obviously did too, you know, and but he's not there to take any of the blame because he has, I don't know, maybe one of the more epic death scenes in the entire movie. Because let's just lay the groundwork. It starts with him sneaking away to smoke a cigarette, which of course in a horror movie, you know, anytime you sin, like you have to pay for it. So
and they set it up too.
Smoking a cigarette, he gets his hand with the cigarette bitten off.
Yeah. Well, and they set up too that he starts trying to smoke a cigarette earlier, and this blonde lady, you know, tells him to stop, and so he stops but then later goes to get it anyway.
Right, reminding us specifically that this is a negative vice which can have consequences in a horror movie. And so it does, in a very deliberate, literal way, in that he loses the hand that was smoking the cigarette, which then, of course, causes them to have to medevac him out of the facility, which will get to the point the helicopter comes down, picks him up. The shark is able, though, because of its super strength, to leap out of the water and grab him while he's being medevaced out.
Technically, it doesn't jump out of the water. What happens is because it's a storm, the gurney falls into the water, and then the shark grabs it.
And then the shark grabs it. But then, that's right. And then the shark takes him with the strength. That's where the strength comes in. The shark takes him and throws him against the lab that they're working in.
Oh, don't forget, it pulls the helicopter down into the control tower, blowing it up.
Oh, also that, which also starts to cause, and so that starts to cause their inability to communicate with people, and then also starts the fires and things that begin the sort of the efforts of the facility sinking, which the sharks need the facility to sink because they need to be able to get over the fencing that they raised to prevent the sharks from jumping out. And also then throwing him into the lab, cracks the lab, water flows into the lab, which enhances the sinking of the facility. So all of these things happen because he went to smoke a cigarette, and the whole sequence is just bang, 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 to the point where, as I said, I even forgot that, he fell in and they got him, because there's just so much going on within a 10-minute span of explosions and sharks.
Yeah, well, his death is just, it lasts all of those stages, because because they put him on this gurney with an oxygen mask because he had his arm bitten off. But then the gurney falls in the water, and so you can see him alive as the shark uses his gurney to ram through a great big window and flood this lab. And you can see that he is alive while this is happening.
Yes.
So certainly he gets a pretty epic death. And there's a couple of epic deaths in this movie. But I think another very notable one, of course, is the big subversion of expectations where Samuel L. Jackson dies pretty early in the middle of his big inspirational speech.
So this is one of the things that I think is so great about that. So I was aware of that going into it. Also had the same feeling that he dies, very early. But this is part of the genius of the movie, is that, so he actually dies over an hour into the movie. So it is early in the scene of that, like, obviously the climax of escape has not happened yet, which is what his big speech is about, because he survived this avalanche and all that. So but that's how powerful this moment is because it catches you so off guard. You feel like he died so early, but the reality is we were 2/3 of the way through the movie before he died. He was there for a significant part of the movie.
Yeah.
But then obviously the climax ramps up, and then so it felt like, because he didn't participate in any of that, and we were expecting him to deliver this great speech, it feels earlier than it actually is time-wise, which I thought was really interesting when I kind of paused it and said, man, that...
Well, he's early in the sequence, right? Because the only characters who die before him are Stellan Skarsgård and Janice in the control tower.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you add all those things up, and it feels earlier than actual clock time on the movie. So I'm not saying your point's not there. I'm saying that's kind of the way the movie ramps into this, is that felt like it was so early in the movie, but it really wasn't. But it's only because the next 40 minutes are so absolutely jam-packed with death and action that it feels like a way more longer period of time than it is, you know.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of that, we have several other shark-based deaths that are make use of 1999 era CGI, which is pretty good for the time. Like certainly, like you watch it today, and you can to use a idiomatic phrase, you can see the pixels a little bit. I don't mean that literally, but it's just like it's not the same as modern CGI, but it's pretty good for when it came out. And you get a couple of those big ones, but one of the other notable deaths that I feel like I want to talk about, kind of in line with what I was saying earlier. Now, I guess also let me preface some of this a little bit by stating, because I don't think I have yet, I love this movie. I think it's great. It's enormously entertaining. So I guess when I just want to preface that I'm when I complain about they're picking on her, and then the tangent of that here now should be taken in the proper context, is my point. But like, apparently Saffron Burrows as the female lead dies too right near the end, when she is basically acting as bait for the trap to try to kill the last shark, but she is bait that does not get away and is killed. But apparently that was not the original ending. The original ending, she did survive, and apparently the test audiences were mad because they felt like she should die because she was responsible for all the mess, for everything. And so they literally went and reshot it so that she died. Which, that's part of why I think I was feeling a little bit like I want to interrogate the movie a little bit on how much is this really her fault. Because the movie, by reshooting it to make her die so that she can be punished for her sins, seems like it is definitely taking the side that it's her fault, when I feel like that's kind of unfair. It was certainly a group effort getting to this point, and her motivation was shock horror, not power, not glory, not money, but to cure Alzheimer's. What a terrible person.
I know, but I feel like that's part of the fun of this movie, is that the person who's the human villain, if you will, is the human villain because she really wanted to cure Alzheimer's because her dad died of it. And it's like, wait, that's the person that we're supposed to cheer gets killed at the end? And I'll tell you, definitely from, I didn't interrogate it as much as you, but and not knowing that it was reshot, it definitely feels like that scene is in there as like a justice thing, like whether or not, and I, like, her dying at the end is what I'm saying. So, whether it seemed unclear to me whether the idea was meant to be that she kind of knew it was her fault, so she was like sacrificing herself, or if the movie was just saying, see, because it was her fault, she ends up having to die. But it definitely has that feel to it, even if you don't know that it was reshot specifically to do that.
Yeah. And I think that, apparently the changes also include going through and taking out a few bits of her being a little bit more sympathetic throughout the movie too. So it's kind of like, all right, well, it's kind of interesting to know, like, to think about it from a storytelling perspective of them thinking of her as the hero, finding that the test audiences did not agree, and then reshooting it tweaking it to make her, perhaps sympathetic in some respects, but still mostly a villain. But I mean, I just, compare that to Burke, Paul Reiser's character from Aliens, right? Like, that guy's just a scuzzball, right? Like, he's just a corporate tool. We don't like him at all. He doesn't care about people. He's just there for the good of the company because presumably he thinks that will get him money or power or something, right? Like, there's no, there's humanity there, but only in his, weakness and greed, right? It's not a noble purpose. But, like, I feel like she's an odd choice for that, but again, I guess part of the reason for that is that wasn't the actual original intention. But the thing that I will not complain about, tied to all of that, is that LL Cool J as Preach, the cook, is great, and he gets to have a bigger hero moment in the ending as a result of the reshoots. So apparently, originally, the big trap that they set up to kill the last shark is they fire this explosive spear that needs to be connected with a cable to a car battery to blow it up. So originally, apparently, it was her that triggered the explosion, but Preach got to do it in the reshoot because she was eaten by a shark. But yeah, so he's a great character, and that's another another real treat of this movie. I think is just how fun he is.
He is, and now that you say that as the original ending, I mean, it makes sense with the way that the movie was set up because there's sort of that drama of her having to kill her creation. I can see where they were going with that, like she having to make that decision that because this had gone wrong, she needs to destroy it, because there were times earlier in the movie where she prevented them from killing the sharks.
Right,
yeah. So
well,
that totally would have made sense thematically.
Yeah, because there's the whole bit where she puts herself in danger because she's got to go get the computer data, because she's feeling like, well, if we don't at least rescue the data where we show that this protein did actually help, then it wasn't even like it was all for nothing, but then that gets destroyed. And so for her to kill the very last shark, has to be this element of, her making the decision that like it's not worth it to try to keep going with that. Although it's just one of those things. I feel like the movie keeps treating wanting to cure Alzheimer's as though it's not a worthy pursuit.
I feel like that's on purpose, though. Like,
yeah.
I feel like it's they deliberately chose something, that you couldn't argue was a good reason to be doing this in the first place.
Yeah.
Just to make it a little more complicated.
And it's true that, like, I think the weaker parts of this movie are the very beginning, because like when it's just her in the office, like first of all, it's a little bit muddied who exactly, like what level of authority does Samuel L. Jackson actually have, because when we meet him, he is standing at the side of an old white guy at the desk, right? But then later when he shows up on the base and he's actually walking around, they talk to him like he's the one in charge. But that's kind of not how they actually visually present him at the beginning, right? They present him more like maybe a partner at best. Like, he's not the one sitting down, at the desk. He's standing at the side of the guy who's sitting down at the desk. And so that's a little... And then she's also pretty intense. But, like, all of that is just getting the set pieces in place, because I think the set itself, like this base that they're in, is great. Like, it makes no sense from any kind of like grounded like realism standpoint, but it makes enough sense that you buy it, right? Like, you don't have to understand the way that it actually works or why flooding it would make anything sink when they show us diagrams of how it's actually rooted on the ground of the floor of the ocean there. But it's like whatever, it's fine. But like, it's just the description of it as they're flying in for the first time is like, what is it? It's like Alcatraz underwater or something.
Yeah.
Because it's got this really old-fashioned, like, because supposedly it was like a submarine refueling base originally that's been refabbed. And so you get all of these flooded compartments and a great big elevator shaft and a cool control tower, and it just, the whole thing looks really fun. It looks like a cool place to be and have an adventure.
So, I agree.
All right.
Yeah.
So, like, this is your movie. Talk more about it.
Um, I would say the other really fun character is, of course, Thomas Jane's character,
Hmm.
the Shark Wrangler, which they introduce him with him again, similar to her, baiting a shark, and then as the shark comes, because the shark has I don't know, has a license plate or something in its mouth, and that's
Hmm.
making it unhappy or something. I don't know what the whole point was.
I think the point is they were going to feed that shark to one of the test sharks. And so they
Oh,
didn't
so they
want
didn't
the test shark to eat the
eat
license
the license.
plate.
That's right. Okay. So anyway, he baits the shark. Shark charges at him, and he has this maneuver where he kind of like spins out of the way and like rides
Hmm.
on its back and is able to remove the license plate from its mouth. And
Hmm.
which there's of course a payoff later in the in the thing when he does that with the super smart fast shark.
Hmm.
Um, and just the silliness of that, and then like the trope of his character, and that he used to be a smuggler, and so he's really good at scuba diving, and he's just trying to like rehab his image, but he's really got a heart of gold, and
Hmm.
everything about him is so goofy, and he delivers it so deadpan that just makes it fun. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
he's a good hero for a movie like this.
Right. Well, and he gets to have tension with Samuel L. Jackson because Samuel L. Jackson is coming in there to survey this whole project to decide whether it should be shut down or not. They literally do the "you've got 48 hours" speech. Actually, I think it comes from the other direction, right? Like she's the one that says, "Give me 48 hours."
I think that's how. Yeah.
Yeah, but he has the whole criminal background thing, so right, like that gets probed. Like, is that something I need to worry about? There's a bit where there's the implication that he has to do what he's told because where else is he going to get a job? Because he's a felon, that sort of thing. They use it against him, that sort of thing. But yeah, mostly he's good at sharks. Is his character trait.
Yeah, well, that to your point, that's all. That's one of the other hand waving things about trying to make it the doctor's fault
Hmm.
is that they have these other people who are involved. Like they kind of make him representative of everybody else and saying like, well, he's not going to ask questions, and that's why he's here, is
Hmm.
because he can't challenge what we're doing because he's a felon, and it's sort of this weird implication that kind of like anybody who might know what they're doing or be aware of what they're doing won't question it because of something like this, even if it's not
Hmm.
exactly this. Like it's very much like he's very much representative of that in that sense. It's
Yeah.
and again, it's not clean, but it is more of a trying to show us that while this information is very
Hmm.
limited to these two doctors on what they're actually doing to make these sharks do this, but anybody else who might suspect it really can't speak out.
Hmm.
And again, it's more just being it's silly, but they at least recognize it and make these kind of goofy attempts
Yeah.
that
I
almost
yeah.
make it more fun. Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
sure, sure. Yeah, like the movie does do some script work to justify like those positions. It's more just a matter of like when I was watching that scene this time, I was just feeling like, all right, come on now. Like, it's one thing to say you made a bad you did the wrong thing for the right reason, and now unfortunately like it's a tragedy, right? Like classic tragedy stuff of like your own ambition or desire, it ends up being the root of your downfall, but it's you know not the punishment is out of proportion for the crime, so to speak. But yeah, but again, it's just kind of like there seems like there's a little bit of like, yeah, the smart woman's got to die because it's all her fault. I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to make too much of that because it's not really actually it doesn't diminish my enjoyment of the movie. It's more just like what I think there's things to talk about there. But what about Preach? You know, you don't want to talk more about him?
Yeah, I mean, he gets, so one of the things that's great about this movie is,
Mm-hmm.
outside of the things that we've already talked about, and we've kind of hinted at, is just this sort of, it's not a domino effect. It's almost a layering effect. The way that these scenes, like it's great scene on top of great scene on top of great scene. Like they took the kind of the horror movie mentality of like you need to have this like really epic kind of death or dramatic scene and like almost the Final Destination
Mm-hmm.
version of it of like let's try to be as elaborate as possible, and except that they just keep layering them on top of each other so that there's this just absolute thrill ride as opposed to a roller coaster. It's just like a straight thrill like the whole time, and he gets to be a part of like some of these great creations of scenes,
Mm-hmm.
from comedy to drama and tension. He's in these great things like he's a uh, he has a video camera in one scene where he's filming what we think is going to be like his, we know that he's a recovering alcoholic and all these things, so we think there's going to be, and that's why he converted to being a preacher. We
Mm-hmm.
think it's going to be this dramatic, like,
Yeah. He
coming
mentions his failings as
a
a
better.
husband and father.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm going to have sort of a confession, my final confessional about my life and a reflection on that. And what it turns out, what the legacy he wants to leave behind is, his best recipe.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it, and the way that he delivers that line, where he's so serious about, what I'm going to talk about, and then he gets this big smile on his face, and is talking about like, some people think that you should add sugar at this point, and
Well,
that is a mistake, and just,
the
I
recipe
forget
for the perfect omelet.
yeah, the perfect
Yeah.
omelet, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's building this whole catalog of recipes via video on his sort
Right.
of his deathbed is
Mm-hmm.
is tremendous. And then his next scene is this absolutely elaborate thing where the shark, his area floods, so he's in waist deep water. Shark can get in there somehow, and it's chasing him around. It chases him into his oven, which is where he's hiding out.
Yeah.
So the kind of the irony of the chef being killed in his own oven is, it's very, I think it's explicitly stated.
Yeah, well, he complains about it, like, because he's talking to God this whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, you have that scene, which is, again, a layering on top, so you took
Mm-hmm.
the comedy scene and then you layered this kind of tension and chase with still a little bit of an edge of comedy. Like they all have a little bit of that little drop of it. Then he manages to escape the oven, and in doing so, when he cuts himself out, he cuts the gas line, and so the room fills with gas, and so he manages to escape the shark and then throw a lighter back into the room to blow the shark up with the gas from the oven that he just escaped from. And so each of those scenes would have been
Mm-hmm.
tremendous in and of itself, and they all stack together with tension and comedy and all of those things. So his scenes are just absolutely like indicative of what's great about this movie, and the way that, and the idea that he keeps surviving when,
Mm-hmm.
His character, the recovering alcoholic cook, should have been one of the first, to.
Well, and
Creature. He should have been one of the first to, yes.
Yeah.
To die. Yeah.
well, like, it is an unfortunate trope in a lot of horror that the person of color in the cast is one of the first to die. And in this case, although Samuel L. Jackson's character does die, it's not first. And LL Cool J does seem like the character that would be superfluous, right? Like, he is not the expert in sharks. He is not the scientist. He is not the like badass security guy. He's the funny cook who is getting revenge for the shark eating his foul-mouthed parrot. And it seems like the sort of character that in a lesser movie would have died early on. He would have been one of the, he would have been a character that exists to get killed so that the movie can have kills. But he ends up surviving all the way to the end.
And is the one who ultimately kills the final
Yeah.
shark, while I do recognize how the original ending would fit into what the movie was building, I like this better specifically for that. And it's not just that he makes it.
Yes.
It's that he is critical to the end, and he gets to become the hero, even though, as you said, he's a superfluous character, essentially. You know?
Right.
So his arc is phenomenal. He's a part of all those great scenes. He has a number of one-liners that I couldn't even go through in all of this. And, you know, like, I mean, just things about them talking about whether or not they want to go down a certain passage. And he's like, trust me, I wouldn't walk through that. You know, like, I wouldn't step down into that water. I think they can get in it. Trust me, you know, like that, you know, because he'd just been running through the waist deep water with them.
Right. Well, he's just so charismatic in this role that you can't. He is lovable every second he's on screen, even when he's doing things that would be unremarkable on the page. Yeah. And so
yeah. It's a lot of. I mean, it's indicative of what is so good about this movie, in that there's just so many. It's almost like the recipes, you know, like there's just, it's like a perfect recipe. Like his character, without him in it, it's maybe not as good. Without Thomas Jane's character, it's not as good. You know, without the way that the script kind of unfolds, it's not as good. Without these, you know, stacking scene on scene, as opposed to just having some of these scenes, like with the way that it just like keeps coming at you. And like, oh, here's what, you know, what next? What next? What next? You know, they escape one room and now they have a problem in the next room, you know? And all of these things, like there's never, the releases of tension are like the little sprinkles of humor, as opposed to like an actual time when like tension comes down and you take a deep breath. Like there's not really any of that for the last 45 minutes to an hour of the movie. And they're just, it's hard to deliver that. And I think, to the point, like his character is one of the irreplaceable pieces of this recipe.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And so, like, even while I think that there's some, you know, like, it was worth bringing up the discussion of, like, how that movie handles Saffron Burrows' character, I do absolutely love LL Cool J's participation in that whole climax and finale. So, like, the fact that he gets more time as a result is absolutely a positive. I mean, and because, you know, they also... technically it's Thomas Jane's line, but it's an exchange between the two of them, gets to be like the final breaking the tension after they kill the final shark. Because, so remind me why Thomas Jane had to go into the water at all. I think what it was is that the lady, her name Sarah, I think, she decides to be bait to draw the shark up so they can shoot it. And I think he just jumps in to try to save her, but fails. Right? Because the plan is just to shoot the shark when it comes to the surface and then connect it to the car battery.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then so once it eats her, and he's already in there, he has to get it back to the surface and also survive.
Yeah.
And so therefore he baits and uses his Wrangler move to get on the back of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was watching carefully just because the move that he does both times is pretty slick in terms of how it's depicted. Ultimately, I watched it a couple of times. Ultimately, what it comes down to is really just that he gets himself into a position where he can brace himself on its nose as it charges and then kind of just judo flip it past him and then grab onto its fin as it passes. That's kind of all that he's...
a little bit of a, like a dodging a moving car thing where he kind of like bounce off the hood.
Yeah, exactly.
Off the side of it to like get himself up there.
Yeah. Right, but like the key piece of like, you know, he prevents it from biting him by getting his hands at his center of mass on its nose, and then you're right, like rolling backwards up over the top of it instead of going down where the teeth are.
Which, if you really want to interrogate the movie, like you can't move that quickly through the water. Like just the density of water, like you don't move that fast. You know, even if you did everything right, like you just kind of be like rolling slowly and the shark would just eat.
Like,
it's not, it's not a thing that
most
can happen.
most of the stuff in this movie is just sciencey enough that it's like, yeah, okay, fine. But there's a handful of spots where you're just like, okay. Like, well, the one that
Yeah.
that mystifies me is there's a moment relatively early on where what happens, this is before anyone has died yet, and Thomas Jane is going out in these little underwater cage tunnels to let him get from different parts of the tank without, being at risk of the sharks. And the two smaller ones attack at the same time from alternate sides of it. And it's impressive, first, just that they are coordinated, right? And so that has people starting to say, how long have they been synchronized like that? But then when the other shark's coming in order to like indicate that like the other two sharks are sort of subservient to the big one, they both swim backwards. And there's actually a line in the movie where one of the characters who has been there on this project the whole time goes, sharks can't swim backwards. They can't. And it's like, why is that line in the movie? Like, we're supposed, like, just they thought it was so important to be able to show the sharks swimming backwards, even though that's supposed to be impossible. Like, they're so smart that they figured out how to do something that their anatomy wouldn't let them do.
That's how I took it, is that these sharks have evolved to a point where they don't even function like regular sharks anymore, without any real reason behind it. I mean, that's how I took it. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that that's the intention, but it just feels weird to have one of the people who ought to know the most about, like, out of anybody in that room, like, she is seeming mystified at this bizarre behavior from the sharks that she has been studying as her day job for months.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah, and how I took it, though, was that this was sort of their first, like, the sharks are so smart that they're keeping these things secret until they're ready to put them to work, almost. That's kind of like how I took it.
Yeah, I think there actually might be something to it. I think from a functional screenwriting perspective, there's an element of they're kind of trying to keep us a drip of tension of things that we should be a little bit concerned about, or red flags on the way to the actual, inciting kill. But like, if you look into some of the theory crafting people get into with the sharks and literally how smart they are, there's an argument that the shark that escapes the facility at the beginning and attacks this boat with the teens on it, that there's an argument that it was a deliberate test to escape and see if they would be able to survive, and so then when it comes back, it can tell the other sharks that no, it's going to be good when we get out. And like it was an actual plan that way. Like, it planned to get out and check things out and then come back to let the others know. But then also, by the same token, one of the things that happens in that early scene is that some red wine gets spilled into the water, and all of a sudden the shark goes crazy. But the thing is, so like, on the one hand, you could say, but sharks, like, they smell the blood. They would be able to tell the difference between wine and blood. Just because it's red wine, it looks visually similar to blood to us. Why would that? But you could make the argument of, like, the shark is smart enough that it is using its other senses, and in this case is marginally fooled, but, like, doesn't smell blood, but it sees something, so it still reacts, in a way that the mindless version wouldn't. I don't know.
That's a lot.
Yeah. But all of that is pretty much on the same level of the idea that the sharks are coordinating their attacks later, specifically to herd the humans around, opening doors and so on, that will continue to flood the facility so that it will sink lower, so that the top of the fence will be below the surface and they can get out. That's pretty silly. But it's kind of fun. It's silly in a fun way. But, I didn't even get to the part that I was trying to say, which was just that, so they, Thomas Jane is out there to bring it to the surface. Preach is, shoots it with this explosive dart that's tied to the cable that has to get detonated with the car battery. But then what he actually does is he shoots Thomas Jane he shoots it into the shark's fin through Thomas Jane's leg. And that's a bit of tension that they don't really pay off in any meaningful way. Like, he basically just gets off anyway, and he has a little bit of a wound on his leg when he climbs out. It's, not a big deal of it. But it still leads us to the exchange of, they've saved the day, they blew up the big shark before it could get away, and they're climbing up out of the water, and he's like, it's a 45-foot shark, and you hit me. Which is pretty good. And then, of course, the whole bit of, Thomas Jane still has kind of his feet dangling in the water. Is like, sure it was just 3 sharks? Yeah. Kind of exchange a look, and he pulls his feet back up out of the water. It's good. It's good stuff.
It was good.
Yeah. So, lots of fun in this movie. It's very silly in many respects, but, and it is heightened, right? There's a sense all the way through that, if you're trying to take the science seriously, you're in the wrong mindset, but the movie is pretty good at just kind of waving you past that enough. It gives you just enough detail to say, we thought of just enough of this that we can assure you that it doesn't matter and don't worry about it. And then
part of the fun of it is it gives you permission to kind of just allow it to be what it is.
Yeah.
The fact that the idea is well, the sharks now do this. Well, they're super smart. Of course they can do that now. You made their brains really big.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, they can do that. They can They can sink the facility by hurting people. Sure.
Yeah. They can swim hard and fast enough to just break through a steel pressure door because the script says so in the script.
We made them bigger and stronger.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And
those are the reasons I love this movie. So
yeah, it's very silly. But I feel like, to come back to the original concept, right? It's silly in many respects, right? But I don't that is only a bad thing if you're someone who thinks that silliness is a bad quality to have in movies.
Yeah, and it's intelligently self-aware.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, this is a very difficult movie to make in the way that they made it and have it deliver on the level that they deliver. You look at something like a Sharknado, which is trying to,
right.
And it's too silly and too dumb. And yes, it's technically self-aware, but it's just not. It doesn't have this. It's not this movie.
To go back to the Christmas sweater analogy, I feel like Deep Blue Sea is a movie, or is a Christmas sweater that was made by the person who knitted it to be awesome. And it's very intense. It's got a lot of crazy stuff on it, but the person who made it thought it was awesome, and they were trying to make an awesome sweater, and maybe it's not to everybody's taste, but they made the sweater they wanted to make. And then Sharknado is like, haha, isn't it funny that people make ugly sweaters? Hey, let's make an ugly sweater on purpose. And as opposed to someone who, I'll confess, I have not watched the Sharknado movies, but it does feel very much like lesser imitators of movies like this one, where it kind of was very conscientiously trying to subvert tropes in order to kind of be fun, but also kind of poke at some of these things that are tropes in this kind of movie, in a way that kind of provokes conversation even as you're having a good time. And then I think those movies are just kind of like shock value and slapstick.
Yeah. That is true. So.
Which, at the same time, is not to my taste. But if someone's out there who says they love the Sharknado movies, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. It's not really what I'm looking for, but I'm sure there's value to be found there, right? Like, I don't think anyone should feel guilty for enjoying them if they do. But yeah, so anything else to say about Deep Blue Sea, or we can move on to Xanadu?
Nope, we'll move on.
All right.
I'll be right back while you kind of switch it over.
Okay, well, it takes me all of that long to switch it over, but so Xanadu is a 1980, I think, 1980 musical starring Olivia Newton-John and Gene Kelly and also some other guy, which is a little bit unfair maybe. His name is Michael Beck, the actor. But it is about, if we want to just like sum up the plot of Xanadu, we've got a frustrated artist who gets inspired by a muse, like literally the sort of the Greek mythical entity that is all about inspiring artists. And the inspiration leads him to meet up with Gene Kelly's character, who used to run a nightclub back in the 40s, but has mostly just kind of been, hasn't known what to do with himself for a while. And we eventually learned that he was inspired by the same muse back in the 40s. But then together, Sonny and Danny, Gene Kelly's character, combined to create a roller disco named Xanadu. And it's a musical, and that's basically it. That's the story. But it's a silly, goofy musical with a lot of just stuff that's in there just to be fun in its own sake. It's not about the plot. It all kind of falls apart towards the end. But gosh, there's sure some fun stuff in this movie.
Yes, and this movie, yeah, I appreciate sort of the silliness of it, and I do enjoy it. Like, I never regret watching it. I just don't. I know that I don't have the same love for it that I know you do. But to your point about like, well, you know about the Sharknado stuff earlier, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with how much you enjoy this movie, because I see the reasons why it's enjoying to you. You enjoy it, but it just doesn't hit me on the same level. So
yeah. So like, and to be sure, you are not alone in your opinion. This movie was a huge flop at the box office when it first came out. I think it has gained some cult success since then. But the interesting thing about it, I think, in terms of its original performance, is that even at the same time that the movie itself was a huge flop, the soundtrack still went double platinum. Like, literally simultaneous with the movie not selling any tickets, people loved the music, which is probably appropriate, honestly. Because
yeah, I like it.
The soundtrack, I think, the soundtrack is the best part of the movie in general. I think it's obviously, to call it 80s is not even quite right, because the movie was made in released in 1980, so it's kind of proto 80s.
Yep.
And a lot of it obviously is trying to stylistically harken back to the 40s, and big band sort of music. But I think that what I love so much about this movie is really not, well, so first of all, let us discuss Sonny Malone, played by Michael Beck. I have a sort of benevolent affection for this guy who is clearly having the pants acted off of him in every scene. He's got an okay singing voice in the songs where he sings, but he is just nothing on screen compared to Gene Kelly and Olivia Newton-John. Like, even the scenes where just like the random secondary friend characters who work at the same record studio as painters, like they are more charismatic than this guy. I don't know what they were trying to do with this guy, because he gives us nothing on screen. I mean, I suspect you're not going to argue with me, but feel free to chime in.
No, I mean, he isn't. I mean, and he's in these really awkward scenes that are made even more awkward by like how much lesser of an actor that he is. Like I'm trying to think of some of the really silly ones. Like when doesn't he like skate into the mural at one point?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that again. Like and he's not doing anything deliberate there, but like he's just so awkward of a character that like when you have an awkward scene like that, it's just kind of like it's so surreal. And then when he's like arguing with Zeus or whatever, like there's just these strange scenes that are just made so much weirder by his presence.
Well, so much of the script is already pretty goofy, and there are a lot of times where what the script requires of his character is to react to very bizarre things happening to him. And Michael Beck is just not super good. And in fact, actually, I just was skimming the trivia section, and apparently the singing is not even him; it's a different guy. When we hear him singing in the movie, it's not even Michael Beck, the actor. So like, I don't know what happened there. Because like, I mean, he might be a perfectly nice guy, but like when the movie requires an awful lot of here, stand in this room under these lights and pretend that you're talking to Zeus, and there's going to be all sorts of special effects around you, and he just kind of stands there like he's waiting to order a sandwich. I mean, it's that stuff's hard, in terms of acting. Like, so like I don't want to make it sound like this guy's a bad guy, but it's just like when you see him with either Gene Kelly or Olivia Newton-John, or frankly any of the other secondary actors, you just feel this tension of them having to lead him through everything. Which, so I don't know. I have not researched a lot about this movie, so I don't know if there's, like, what's the postmortem on that, so to speak.
I mean, I can tell you, I just looked at his filmography. The only two movies that I've even heard of that he's in are The Warriors and this. And this was, he maybe did like 2 or 3 movies after this, but they were nothing we've ever heard of. He was primarily a television actor on his filmography. So.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, I mean, I believe it, because at least as evidenced by this movie, he's not that good. And frankly, even in this movie, even though you could argue that he's sort of like the protagonist character, Olivia Newton-John has like the higher billing for sure, and deserves it. And so he is like, they give him a lot of stuff to do that is either react to this bizarre thing or just like steamroll through whatever it is that needs to happen. But yeah, none of it just really works that well, like and also that like, it's a bizarre writing choice that they literally have defined him by, I don't like my soul crushing job and I kind of wanted to be a painter, but I don't know what to paint. And like literally like the answer as given in the story, like what Olivia Newton-John inspires him to do is help Gene Kelly form a nightclub. Which they establish explicitly as Gene Kelly's dream, not Sonny's dream. But Sonny can help him with kind of a modern 1980s sensibility for it. Which, like, okay. But I kind of want to stop talking about Sonny now, because we can acknowledge that he's not the strongest part of the movie for sure.
The only last thing I'll say, just looking at
Okay.
his filmography, is that he apparently has made his career since then in being the primary narrator of John Grisham audiobooks.
Oh, well, hey, you know what? Good for him.
Yeah, so sort of an interesting
Yeah.
trivia too.
Yeah. But, now that we've kind of addressed, the Sonny in the room, Olivia Newton-John and Gene Kelly are great.
Yes.
They are both so fun. Like, every scene that they're in is just made better by their presence. And it's like the music's good. Gene Kelly is a fun guy. We like to see him dance. And this was his last movie, I guess, Gene Kelly. And but he's still pretty light on his feet considering. Get some good dance sequences in this, even though they're not quite as acrobatic as some that he did when he was younger. But still plenty of smooth moves there, and he has fun doing them. It seems, and then Olivia Newton-John is just like, you believe her as a muse. And I mean, I don't literally mean we forget that she's an actress. I just mean she's great. She's beautiful. She sings. She's fun. I love how deadpan she plays this whole bit when she's telling Sonny that she's a muse, and she's literally rewriting the words in the dictionary and making the TV talk to him and everything. And she's just doing this with a slightly exasperated, I'm trying to explain to you that, yes, I am a mythical, magical creature designed to inspire people, and I've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years. Obviously. Why won't you listen to me? I just love that that's kind of this attitude. She's just using this casual magic just to make characters in the black and white movie talk to him, and that scene goes on longer than you'd expect. The characters in this old black and white gangster movie keep chiming in with, she's definitely a muse, kid, but also I need to find Brenda Carter because I think she's the one that framed me for murder. I think some of that's a lot of fun. But ultimately though, it's the music that's what's amazing in this movie, right? It's the music and the sequences, just there's a sense of fantasy built into it from the beginning that feels very of its time. You know what I mean? This sort of you can see the 80s starting to be born, but it's not quite there yet. Some of the outfits are, really, you can tell that they're trying to be very stylish for this time that how do you define the fashion of 1979, 1980? Is it this? Not really. But they sure try to do something.
Well, there's that one scene to kind of take out what you were talking about with Gene Kelly when he's dancing and roller skating through the thing and putting on all the different outfits. It's so, all of them are so just so real,
Yeah,
the whole thing about that. I mean, it's so much fun and he's good, but that's a combination of the two things you were just talking about,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this movie is a big swing, right? They it doesn't look like it was probably terribly expensive, but they really they didn't play it safe with this movie. They were willing to just really go out there and just do stuff, and I tell you, a lot of it, that whole the makeover montage where he's getting the new outfits, and this is all over the world, that song, and I feel obviously that is a trope of lots of movies, the whole musical new outfit montage is not something that has not been in other movies, but I feel in some ways that this is the epitome of the silliest versions of that. just like the mannequins are dancing along. All of the people who are like either at the store or work at the store have their own extremely weird outfits on. There's just all sorts of dancing and posing all over the like racks at the store. And, Gene Kelly keeps coming out in these really bizarre outfits that some of them are some of them are actually pretty cool. Some of them are extremely silly. But yeah, it's just, there's just an energy of fun around it. And then you also have other sequences that like, it's so obvious that, like there's a bit where, the implication in fiction is that this record studio has what is more or less a holodeck that just exists to inspire the artists. Where it's just this room that you can boop, 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 boop on the control panel, and it just makes a like beach with palm trees appear, or like a city skyscraper roof and everything, and they're just dancing around, roller skating around, and then they fly at one point because they've got wire harness on them too, and it's again like extremely not subtle in terms of like they go to the desert sequence, and there's these palm trees that are just rising up from being laid down on the ground, and it's like, okay. And then the train comes through, and there's lots of steam. And then the animated sequence, and so like the movie is just bonkers, right? But I think the scene that really kind of like epitomizes the things about this movie that I really love is the sequence where Sonny and Danny have gone to this place where they're going to build Xanadu, and they're kind of arguing about what kind of style it should have. And so Gene Kelly is basically envisioning it being like this big version of the club he had in the 40s, and he's talking about the big band and all of that sort of thing. And then Sonny's talking about this extremely 80s version thing, and they have these two visions that are kind of, going back and forth that seem so opposed to each other, but then there's a moment later where they literally have the two sets merge and interlock and have the songs become like a mashup with each other, and it's just transcendent. I think that song is incredible. So
yeah, and this is one of those things where it's like where I respect why that, like, it's not enjoyable for me, but it doesn't take me to the same place that it takes you.
That's fair.
And but I totally get why it takes you there, and that's why I'm not arguing or think that there's anything wrong with this movie. I mean, it is definitely better than it gets credit for, but I'm not of the critical group that thinks that this movie is trash or anything like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of fun in it. Didn't mind watching it. It doesn't. It's a scene like that where I can see the joy on your face just even reminiscing about it, and I remember the scene, and it's like it was interesting to me, but it just doesn't do the same thing, and that's okay. That's part of what this.
And I think in some respects that's part of what maybe we're talking about here. Like what people really mean when they call something a guilty pleasure is not really something that they feel guilty about so much as they are hesitant to express their affection for because they think other people won't agree. And so it's less about like there being anything actually wrong with it, and more a reflection of how a lot of people can feel uncertain about liking something that is not, like mainstream, right? It's kind of the flip side of the hipster thing, right? Where, there's the hipster ideal of like, well, I only like this new thing that I discovered that nobody else knows about yet. But, like the other side of that emotional coin is, well, I love this thing, but everyone else thinks it's weird, and I don't want them to think I'm weird, so I don't want to say that I love it. And I think that that's maybe where the whole concept of guilty pleasure really kind of comes from, maybe.
That makes sense, and and we didn't get into that with Deep Blue Sea because we happen to align.
We're a little bit closer in our feelings about that one.
Yeah, but there are definitely people who don't, who are just like, how do you talk so like just like that? Like, I don't question why you talk passionately about this movie, but there are people could question that, and people would question me as to like,
Mm-hmm.
how could you talk so passionately? Like, how do you making a defense of this movie? It's about these weird CGI sharks that, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's like,
Yeah.
and I try to defend it, and I feel like I have a good defense, but some people, they think if you don't see it, you don't see it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think that that's fair.
Right.
Um,
But
yeah,
yeah. So I think it's I think that's maybe why I have a little bit of a knee jerk reaction against the just even the concept of a guilty pleasure, because it's this whole thing about like if something gives you joy to watch, like you shouldn't feel bad about that. And there's an element of having the confidence to love the things that you love and not worry so much about whether other people might think it's weird to like it.
I agree.
I do have a question about that mashup sequence, though, because the time periods being depicted in there, you have the 1940s and even maybe a bit earlier, like Glenn Miller sort of era, big band, like jazz sort of music. And then you have sort of proto 80s pop rock, right? So that means that contemporary music right now is about at the right gap to be a third piece of that puzzle, right? So what song, like what modern song do you think would be a good third piece for that sequence? Like obviously we're not literally going to try to mash up the songs, but you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it's gonna take me a second. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like
Well,
that. Things are changing so fast now. Like it's almost like. And what age group are they trying to appeal to? Teens or college? Or
yeah, I mean, I think teens and early 20 somethings is certainly what they kind of are going for in the movie.
yeah, like weirdly, like right now, like if you had asked me today, it might have to be like a BTS song.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can see that.
That's kind of taken over that jaunt. That
Hmm.
it's
Well, certainly both of those songs are the pop of their respective time period, right? As opposed to the like serious artiste music, right? Like Glenn Miller is great, but he wrote popular music at that time, right? It's
yeah. If you were gonna go to a teen focused roller disco or whatever might be the case right now,
hmm
they would have BTS on their soundtrack. And
Yeah,
teens would
BTS is a K-pop band for anyone who doesn't know that.
yeah,
Yeah, they're
I
extremely popular for anyone who
anything
is
about pop.
25 or younger. Sorry, you
And
were
I
breaking
actually,
up a little
the
bit.
funny thing is, the reason they're in my mind right now is that I just saw they just signed a deal today with McDonald's
Oh yeah.
to do a limited time make a BTS burger
Okay.
or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I know
But anyway,
McDonald's has been doing like special sort of like value packs of like this is the order that so and so orders or whatever.
yeah, and they did like it wasn't a Happy Meal, but it was like the same style. Like you ordered a meal and you could get like a
Hmm.
bobblehead of like a wrapper. Like yeah, there was they're doing all sorts of strange things like that. But yeah,
Hmm.
anyway, BTS was in the news again today, but they are far and above the most popular teen band in the planet right now.
Yeah.
So it's probably them.
Now, I think there's really something to that. Now, like, one of the, even though I know it was my question, I tend to struggle a little bit just because I'm usually not that up to speed on whatever's actually current. in terms of popular music, but like I've thought about this question before, and even some of the songs that I have had previously thought about are already now feel like they wouldn't be current enough. One of them was Kanye's "Flashing Lights" song. You know the one I mean?
Yep. Oh yeah. No,
Yeah.
I know that song
Yeah.
very well. But
Although, like, Kanye has taken a turn in terms of his public persona since then. But another song that had struck me as having a similar sort of energy to it was "Party in the USA." Even though that's
also
a
an
little.
older song, technically.
Hmm?
Also
What?
an older song. Though.
Well, yeah, like that's the thing is that like it wasn't as much older when I originally had the idea for it because like this question had occurred to me several years ago. But you're right. But yeah, I think BTS is an excellent choice there. I think that makes a lot of sense. But
What might be interesting actually is "Blinding Lights" by The Weeknd.
I don't think I know that one. I'll have to check it out.
So it's a modern song
Mm-hmm.
that is specifically done to sound like it's sampling the 80s.
Huh.
But it doesn't actually sample any 80s songs. Like people have tried to like pin it to like Take On Me and like some of these things, but only because it has that vibe to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I would look that one up. Blinding Lights
Yeah, I
by The
will.
Weeknd.
I will.
Is that one, because that would be kind of a fun in the way that it's basically modernized exactly that kind of
Mm-hmm.
music. Maybe not the proto 80s, but
Yeah.
it is meant to elicit the feeling of 80s music.
Right. Well, I like one of the things I think is kind of fascinating about that sequence in the movie, though, is just how it is trying to be forward-looking about what it thinks '80s music is going to be, and looking back on it with hindsight, they don't quite nail it. But it's not bad, you know. It's the visual aesthetics of it, I think, are weirder. The song holds up relatively well, I think, but it's the music of it is not that complicated. It's more just like the weird outfits and the the guy walking around with the synthesizer board.
Sort of, I mean, obviously, like again, from the straight thematic, like BTS is probably the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
But from the idea that you're just talking about of like this is what we think 80s is going to sound like,
Mm-hmm.
this is a 2020, 2021 song that sounds like what we now remember 80s
Mm-hmm.
music to sound like.
Yeah,
So,
interesting. But yeah, so
yeah.
so I will say that like even as much as I love this movie, by the time they actually get to opening night and they have this, they have this very long conversation with, I guess, Zeus and Hera, where maybe they will let her go back for just a moment or forever. I forget which is which, because that's a whole gag, right? Like that whole sequence starts to go on like a long time with a relatively low hit percentage.
You honestly, you nailed what is ultimately the downfall of this movie for me.
Yeah, doesn't end strong.
It does not end strong at all. What should have been a really strong climax with the best songs and the best dancing is ultimately pretty weak in my opinion, and it deflates my overall enjoyment of the movie. And so
Yeah.
I do recognize the scenes that you talked about. It just doesn't come together for me, especially when we're looking at it in this format, comparing it to like a Deep Blue Sea, where the scenes stack on each other to the point where they become better and better and better. This one does not end that strong. So
Yeah, I think that it would have been a better choice to maybe just stick with the actual Xanadu title song, which is a great song, and just maybe make that a bigger production number, and maybe have some little dialogue breaks in the middle of it if you want to have more scene and to show different things happening during it, but rather than having it be this weird medley of nonsense that doesn't really seem to I think the implication is supposed to be like that this club is kind of a fusion of all sorts of different things, and that's supposed to be cool about it, but again, it's just not, a lot of it is very interesting. which is just a shame because like the actual Xanadu title song is a great song, and you could have that just to be a big moment, have that be the big finale with Olivia Newton-John, but you have that interrupted with an awful lot of stuff we don't care very much about, and then having kind of a slightly awkward note of like Kira, Olivia Newton-John, disappears, but then there's a waitress that looks just like her, and Sonny goes and talks to her, and I guess, is that supposed to be her, or we're not sure? Oh, the movie's over, okay. So that's a little weird too.
Yeah, I took that as just a sloppy way of saying, like to your earlier point about whether they were arguing and joking about whether she could stay for a short time or forever. That was like her way of staying forever, is that she became a human. But it's so sloppy in how it's delivered, that I'm just inferring that because of just knowing storytelling.
No, I agree. I think you're right on in terms of that is the intent, but you're also that it's a very sloppy execution. And again, and only really like, as someone who I would not say that I have face blindness, like in the way that some people have, like as an actual like a serious condition, but I have a harder time recognizing faces than I think a lot of people do. And it doesn't help that they only show this waitress that looks like her because it like is Olivia Newton-John. They only show her at kind of a 3/4 profile shot. You don't even really get a good look at her. And I feel like if I didn't know that it was supposed to be her, I'm not sure I would have necessarily even figured that out. I would be like, I would have to think about it. Like, wait, why is he just talking to her? Oh, wait, was that her? Maybe I have to rewind. I wouldn't just automatically say, oh yeah, that's definitely her.
Right.
But in any case, there's so much in this movie that I love so much that it more than makes up for the parts that are not as strong. Like, I'm just thinking again of like one of the early sequences with Sonny that just highlights how unserious most of that movie, most of that stuff is the part where he keeps seeing Kira all over the place, and then he sees her roller skating away. He needs to chase after her. So he just runs up to these girls where they each have their own sort of motorized scooter, motorcycle, moped thing, and there's a third one next to them. And he runs up and just says, hey, I'm going to borrow this, okay? I'll bring it right back. And then they're like, oh, hey, as long as you bring it back in person. But that's the extent of their objection for him taking away presumably their friend's scooter. Do they even know? He just rides away, and then he rides it off the dock, and we never visit that again. So it's just kind of like, all right, well. And again, it's just this sequence where you can almost feel the awkward writing there of, well, he needs to chase after her, so we need him to get a scooter. But we don't want him to be a bad guy, so we don't want him to like just steal a scooter. So he has to like have permission. But how would he get permission? Like, he doesn't know well, okay, we'll just have a girl give him permission, and then it's fine. And you just you almost feel that conversation being had when they're working on the script. But in any case, there's that stuff in it, but then there's also, Olivia Newton-John and Gene Kelly singing great songs and dancing, and it's so much fun. So, anyway, what we should have done before right now is decided what we want to do next.
Yep.
How about this as a thought? One of the things that we often talk about when we are doing the Oscar marathon is we reflect on how we think it's very valuable to be open-minded enough to consider movies that are not in English, not American movies, as possibilities for very good movies that we sometimes don't get a chance to see because they are not as popularly released. But like, what if, just kind of in the virtue of like, what are some good, foreign language movies that we should watch? We could just pick one of those. What do you think?
I'm down for that. That is
Yeah. Of course.
tough.
Yeah, I know. I come up with this idea. I don't immediately have one just ready to hand. I will say Minari, which is one of the Best Picture nominees this year, it's an American film, but a lot of it is in Korean because it's about Korean Americans, which actually made it a little bit of a controversy because, like, I think the Golden Globes or something put it in Best Foreign Language Film, and people are saying, wait, it's an American movie made by Americans about American characters who just happen to be immigrants who speak Korean. That doesn't make it like not an American movie. Which I don't know. I think there's something there. But the other like the other movie that immediately came to mind is actually Parasite, just because that was a big one recently. But those are just recent big examples. There are lots of classics that. Hey, I know. I'm going to suggest Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai, not because I know it and love it, but because it's one that I feel like I would love, but I haven't actually watched it.
Okay. There's Parasite's very good.
Mm-hmm.
Sillier note, there's that Last Train to Busan.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very good. Das Boat,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
very good. I don't think there's any that I haven't seen that I want to see.
I also thought a little bit about Pedro Almodovar's movies. Lots of those are pretty good. Like All About My Mother
Yeah.
is one that comes to mind.
Do you like watching The Seventh Samurai? I think that's a good one to put out there.
Well, and it's just one that I've kind of always meant to see. It's like it's something that I know is very influential. Well, for that matter, I mean, one of the things that we could do as a slightly variation on this theme is that Seven Samurai was obviously the inspiration for Magnificent Seven, right?
Yeah.
So we could watch those too.
I'm willing to do that as opposed to trying to come up with one. Yeah,
Well, I
that's
mean,
fine.
because we're putting each other on the spot a little bit, so we could do that. We could
Yeah,
talk
let's do
about
that.
adaptations.
And Magnificent Seven and discussing those two. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, the Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven. We'll be back to talk about those. In the meantime, watch good movies, everyone.
Good movies.